Before we begin our class, let us have the Brahmanad. Om. Om. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Swastika. In our previous class, we discussed how the grandmother and the grandson were called to the city house after the parents of Khushwant Singh were comfortably settled there. After coming to the city, the grandson was given admission in an English medium school. There he was taught English words, Archimedes' principle, modern science, and other things. But he was not taught about God and the scriptures. The grandmother could not help her grandson in his studies. At the same time, she was very upset because her grandson was not taught about God and the scriptures in that English medium school. She became very much disappointed when she came to know that her grandson was being given music classes at school because to her music had some lewd associations. It was not meant for gentlefolk. She thought that it was the monopoly of harlots and beggars. And when the grandson went up to university, he was given a separate room of his own in the city house, and the grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation, but she did not protest. She engaged herself in three different ways. What were they? They were spinning the wheel from dawn to dusk, reciting her prayers, and feeding the sparrows in the afternoon for half an hour. In these ways, she spent her days. Now let us go through the fourth unit of the lesson, the portrait of a lady. When I decided to go abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandmother would be upset. Here in this sentence, I refers to the author Khushwant Singh. When the author Khushwant Singh decided to go abroad, here abroad means to another country for further studies. Here further studies means higher studies. He was sure that his grandmother would be very upset or sad. So what have you understood? When the author Khushwant Singh decided to go to another country for his higher studies, he was sure that his grandmother would be very sad. I would be away for 5 years. He would go to another country for his higher studies for 5 years. And at her age, as she was in her extremely old age, one could never tell. Dot dot dot. What does it mean? One could never tell when she would breathe her last. My grandmother could. She did not show any emotion. Rather, she was not sad. She allowed her grandson to go another country for higher studies. She was not even sentimental. Sentimental means easily moved by tender feelings. She came to leave me at the railway station but did not talk or show any emotion. When The time came for the author to leave for abroad for his higher studies. She also joined other members of the family and came to the railway station to see him off. She came to leave the author at the railway station, but she did not talk or she did not show any emotion. Her lips moved in prayer. Her mind was lost in prayer. And what was found? Even at the railway station, even at the railway station, it was found that her mind was absorbed in the thought of the Almighty Lord. Her lips moved in prayers, and her mind was completely lost in prayer. Her fingers were busy telling the beads of her rosary. Here, telling the beads of rosary means counting the beads of her rosary. Her fingers were busy counting the beads of her rosary. Silently she kissed my forehead, and when I left, I cherished the moist imprint as perhaps the last sign of physical contact between us. The grandmother silently kissed the forehead of her grandson when the grandson left for abroad for his higher studies. And the author Khushbant Singh cherished means kept a pleasant feeling in mind for a long time. The moist, here the moist means slightly wet. Imprint means impression, as perhaps the last sign of physical contact between us. What does this mean? This means he was not sure that he would be able to see his grandmother alive when he would return to his homeland after the completion of his higher studies after 5 years. But that was not so. What does it mean? It means what he anticipated did not come true. After 5 years, I came back home and was met by her at the station. After 5 years, he returned home after the completion of his higher studies. And when he returned home after 5 years, he was again met by his grandmother at the railway station. His grandmother had gone to the railway station with other members of the family to receive him at the railway station. She did not look a day older. After 5 years, the grandson Khushbant Singh did not find any change in her appearance. She did not look even a day older. After 5 years also, she did not find any change in his grandmother. She still had no time for words, and while she clasped means held tightly or embraced me in her arms, I could hear her reciting her prayer. Even at the railway station, the grandmother had no time for words, and while she embraced the author in her arms, the author could hear his grandmother reciting her prayers. Even on the first day of the writer's arrival, grandmother's happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer and with frivolous rebukes. Frivolous means affectionate, rebukes means scoldings. And what was also found? Even on the first day of the writer's arrival from abroad, the grandmother's happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer and with affectionate scoldings. In the evening, a change came over her. There was a change in grandmother in the evening. And what was that change found in grandmother in the evening? The change that was found in grandmother in the evening was that she did not pray. What did she do? Instead of praying, she collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum and started to sing. The grandmother gathered the women of the neighborhood, arranged an old drum and started to sing. What does it mean? It means she wanted to celebrate the arrival of her grandson from abroad. That was the reason that evening she did not pray. Rather, she collected the women of the neighborhood, arranged an old drum and started to sing. For several hours she thumped. Thumped means hit hard. The sagging skins. The sagging means hanging loosely. Skins of the dilapidated. Dilapidated means old and in a very bad condition. Drum and sang of the homecoming of warriors. Warriors, persons fighting in a war. See how she celebrated the arrival of her grandson from abroad. She was very happy when her grandson returned home after the completion of his higher studies. We had to persuade her to stop to avoid overstraining. Here we refers to the family members of the author. Had to persuade. Here persuade means to convince, and the family members of the author had to convince the old lady or the grandmother to stop, to avoid overstraining. Overstraining means damage by exertion or taking too much pressure. That was the first time since I had known her that she did not pray. The author had known his grandmother that she used to pray throughout the day. But that day, when he returned home after completion of his higher studies from abroad, it was found that she did not pray. So that was the first time since the author had known his grandmother that she did not pray. The next morning she was taken ill. It was found that she was ill the next morning. The next morning she was taken ill. It was a mild fever. Mild means not severe. It was a mild fever, and the doctor told us that it would go. That means the fever would go and she would recover from her illness. But my grandmother thought differently. But grandmother did not believe what the doctor told the members of the family. As she thought differently, she understood or she realized that her end was near. She told us that her end was near. And what did she inform to the members of the family? She informed to the members of the family that her end was near. It means that she was going to die and she would not recover from her illness. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the last chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray. She was not going to waste any more time talking to us. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the last chapter, before the close of the last chapter means before her death, she had omitted. She had omitted means she had left to pray. And she was not going to waste any more time talking to us, and she did not want to waste her time talking to others. She wanted to spend the remaining of her time with the thought of God and with prayers. we protested. Here we refers to the family members of the author. What did the family members of the author do? The family members of the author protested when they found that the grandmother was not talking to them. But she ignored our protests. She did not listen to our protests. She did not listen to the protests of her family members, as she had already determined that she would spend her remaining time with the thought of God and with prayers. She lay peacefully in bed, praying and telling her beads. And she lay in the past tense of lie. You know, lay means put oneself in a resting position. She lay peacefully in bed, praying and counting her beads of rosary. Even before we could suspect, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. While praying and counting her beads of rosary, her lips suddenly stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. It means that she breathed her last, and it was not even thought by the family members of the author. Even before the family members of the author could suspect that she would breathe her last, her lips stopped moving and the beads of rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. A peaceful pallor spread on her face, and we knew that she was dead. A peaceful pallor, pallor means paleness, spread on the face of the grandmother, and the family members of the author knew that the grandmother was no more. The grandmother was already dead. We lifted her off the bed and, as is customary, laid her on the ground and covered her with a red shroud. The family members, after the death of the grandmother, lifted her body off and, as is customary, customary means in accordance with custom, laid her on the ground and covered her dead body with a red shroud. Shroud means cloth for dead body. After a few hours of mourning, mourning means expressing sorrow after the death of a nearer and dearer one. After a few hours of mourning, the family members of the author left her body alone to make the necessary arrangements for her funeral. In the evening, we went to her room with a crude stretcher to take her to be cremated. In the evening, after making all the necessary arrangements, the family members of the author went to her room with a bamboo raw stretcher to take her dead body to be cremated. The sun was setting and had lit her room and veranda with a blaze of golden light. And you know, a blaze of means a very bright show of golden light. We stopped halfway in the courtyard, but the family members could not go to the room of the grandmother. What did they do? They stopped halfway in the courtyard. Why did the family members stop halfway in the courtyard? The family members stopped halfway in the courtyard because they found all over the veranda and in her room right up to where the grandmother's dead body lay covered in a red shroud. Thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. What did they find? They found thousands of sparrows sat scattered. Scattered means spread all around or over on the floor. There was no chirping. There was no noise. There was no cry. There was no sound. We felt sorry for the birds, and my mother placed some bread for them. And the family members felt sorry for the birds, as the grandmother used to feed the sparrows in the courtyard with the crumbs of bread. As she was dead, no one was there to feed the sparrows. So the family members of the author felt sad for the birds, and the mother of the author fetched means brought some bread for the birds. She broke it into little crumbs, and the mother of the author broke the bread into little pieces, as the way the grandmother used to do, and threw all the crumbs of bread to them. The sparrows took no notice of the bread. See, but the sparrows took no view, no notice of the bread. They did not even look at the pieces of bread thrown to them by the mother of the author. When we carried my grandmother's corpse means dead body, off, they flew away quietly. And when the family members of the author carried the dead body of the grandmother, the birds, the sparrows flew away silently without making any sound, without making any noise. Next morning, the sweeper swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. Next morning, the sweeper, while sweeping, swept the bread pieces that were found scattering all around the courtyard into the dustbin. And what is found here? Here it is found the love and affection of birds towards human beings. We, the human beings, are self centered and we run after our self interests. But see, the birds and animals, they are not self centered, they are quietly different from us. Here we find the love and affection of birds and animals towards human beings. So let us be kind towards animals and birds in order to balance our ecological system.